Hi everyone, today we got a bit of a nothing day here, basically unchanged on the session. Came down and hit the trend like we expected, bounced off the trend like we expected, but we didn't get that push through. Do we get the continuation tomorrow? Let's take a look at all of the charts. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and watch the video till the end to help out the channel, and let's get started. In news today, we got word that Berkshire Hathaway took a new stake in United Health, a beleaguered insurer that's been really beaten down aggressively over the last couple of months for many reasons, but now you have Berkshire buying more than 5 million shares worth about $1.6 billion, which puts it as the 18th largest position in the Berkshire portfolio behind Amazon, Constellation Brands, as well as Variety Data. But current portfolio, $300 billion. So because it was such a small investment, it could have been one of the lieutenants, not necessarily Buffett himself liking this position, which I think is probably most likely the case. But on the word of this, the insurer shot up 6%. You can see it's up 7.6% today. Massive move here for United Health, especially one that's been beaten down so aggressively. And then just a quick look at the PPI, way hotter than expectations. 0.2 was the expectation, 0.9 is what we got. So a lot bigger than what we were expecting on the PPI data. And look at these numbers here. PPI went from 2.4 up to 3.3 from the last indicator, and that is not good at all. You can see the core number, slight step up, 2.6 to 2.8, but that is rising inflation data and definitely way higher than what we were expecting, way higher than what the Fed wants to see. So it'll be interesting. We'll take a look at the Fed futures later to see what this did for the potential cuts for this year. And just look at that chart. 0 here, good numbers, 0.4, had some negative numbers in here, March, April, but then big spike. These are numbers that we were seeing back here when we were hiking rates. So not at all what we wanted to see. Moving over to fear and greed, we got a 64 from a 63, basically no movement across the session, really no movement across the indicators here. Breadth continues to turn up a little bit. Want to see what that looks like on the charts, and then looking at put call ratio, maybe a slight tick up there, interesting. And then volatility, slight tick up there as well, interesting. Again, safe haven demand, junk bond demand, no movement there at all. Moving over to the Fed futures, we haven't looked at these since we got all of the inflation data, but the markets now believe we are going to get a cut in September. The cuts are priced in for September. A little bit surprising we didn't get more movement on that PPI data today. The PPI data was really hot, and because of that, you can see just a little fluctuation here, but I would have expected that to be a little bit more. So PPI, in my opinion, is a little bit more of a leading indicator that is going to come into CPI later. And then look at October. Chance of 2 cuts by October, interesting. And then December, 1 cut, 2 cut is still the most likely case, but potential for 3 cuts December. So market thinks maybe 3 cuts in consecutive meetings here to finish out the year. I don't really believe that's going to happen. I think that's a little bit too optimistic on the cut side. Or maybe they think there's something broken underneath, which is why we're going to get more cuts and it's actually going to be bearish cuts. That would be interesting. But just look at these huge movements that we had seemingly not that long ago. We were at no movement until December, and now we're looking at 3 cuts into December. Moving over to Max Pain here, you can see Max Pain still 625. Total options went down a little, 3.7 million. Put call ratio still extremely high, so not expecting to fall through the floor by any means. But you could fall towards 530, which is still 3% lower. Wouldn't really expect to get too much lower than kind of 640, which is interesting, but still tons and tons of puts, so wouldn't expect too much of a fall. Maybe the week after makes sense. Moving over to the charts, looking at the S&P is basically unchanged here on the daily chart, right at the trend here on the daily chart. Momentum still bullish, RSI a little bit overbought. Looking at it here on the hourly, like we talked about on the intro, came down to the trend right at this flat top. Kind of looks like a bullish triangle still here. Looks like we should be able to get through that and push towards the upper trend, but for now we have not done that. Momentum still stepping towards bullish, RSI right at the SMA stepping down a little bit. That's concerning. Does this start to fade a little bit? Maybe that's why we're seeing just a slight hesitation on the VIX going a little higher. Definitely want to take a look at breadth. Did breadth fade with this flat move, or is this just a flat pullback in time before we get the continuation? Moving over to the Tasty charts here just for a second, you can see we dip below that trailing stop. You're technically in bearish conditions here on the hourly chart. Volume came through at the end of the session, drifting slightly higher from that volume candle. Trailing stop right now, 646. is your trailing stop, really almost 647 in this second ATR band area. And then looking at the 4-hour here, you can see really very little movement. 8 EMA continues to hold its support at 644. Sitting on that 8 EMA, as long as that holds, you're in good shape. Upper ATR band 647.89. Moving over to the NASDAQ. NASDAQ looks significantly worse. It was only down a little bit, 45 cents on the day, fell further, retraced, filled the gap. After hours were dipping a little bit more, down about $1. Don't love this, right? So you have a high, lower, high structure here. Certainly not as bullish. Got that 55 EMA on the hourly as support still at 578.33. Looks like we're going to probably fall through there. Trend support in here around 576.50 or so. That's going to be an interesting area. Momentum on the daily chart is still bullish. You're right in this kind of zone of resistance we've been watching. Had kind of a rising wedge formation, got above that. Now we're retracing, which if this is the kind of overthrow and we start to sell, that could give you a little bit more downside. Maybe 571 is in play, closer to this zone here. Right now, momentum bearish, RSI bearish, but as long as that 55 EMA holds, that's going to continue to be support. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and watch 55 EMA here and then the trend line here as some zones of support. We'll see what happens in these areas tomorrow, as I do believe they will get tested. Moving over to the NASDAQ here on the Tasty charts, you can see hit the upper ATR band yesterday, pulled back below the 8 EMA on the 4-hour trailing stop. 573.81 is your trailing stop on the 4-hour chart, which is a pretty substantial move. That's about 1% lower. And then looking at that hourly chart, back into bearish conditions with the leg down on PPI. Current support is your 55 EMA, same as the previous chart here, 578.20. And then that next level is the lowest ATR band, sitting down there at 575.87. So potential for a couple of levels. Like I said, I think we're probably going to go a little bit lower tomorrow. Do we find support in those areas? That's the bigger question. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow. The Russell was down 1.29%, had a massive 2 days in a row, big gap down, surprisingly so. Of course, PPI was the driver for that. Came down and tested support 226. We said that was a potential zone of support yesterday, and we came into that area, ended up holding that zone and bouncing. We're up just a smidgen after hours. See if we can get back above 229. That's really what I'm hoping for tomorrow. I'm hoping markets will kind of shake this off, and it was just the fact that we were a little extended, got a little bit of a shock on that data. We'll see. And then looking at the Dow, kind of same thesis. Inside candle, gap down, struggling at this zone, but after hours, we're getting a push. Of course, that's probably United Health getting a massive push on the news from Berkshire, but we'll see. Can we get above this all-time high? We're pretty much there. The high here is 450.25 and we're at 450.33. So we're above it. If we can hold those gains, momentum bullish, RSI bullish. Moving over to the Mag 7. Mag 7 struggling at the trend once again. It was a little positive today, a little bit more than the NASDAQ was positive, but this is trend resistance and it is absolutely holding as resistance. Just want to zoom out and show this a little bit better so you can see where that trend line came from. That is an extremely long-term trend line here. So this was going all the way back to this zone here. October of 23 marks a bottom, April of 24, again here September of 24, and then now we are here as resistance. That's why you got to look at those longer term trends. We are right at it. It is a key zone of resistance. Can't seem to get above it. My guess is we're probably going to get a little bit of a rejection there. RSI on the weekly is at a 71.4, so already extended. And after hours, we are down just about 10 cents. Moving over to Apple and Microsoft. Apple was down just a smidgen here, 0.25%. Still cannot get above that 235. Still didn't even touch it really. The high of day was 235.12. The level's 235.93. So came up short, hit the high from yesterday and sold. Still hovering after hours, no movement. Momentum is flat here. It's still bullish, but it was flat. Still super extended. Maybe this is a little bit of a top here in this zone between 230 and 235. Of course, you trade the levels. If you can get above it, look for the next one. If you start to dip below it, probably going to come down to this kind of 220 area. Look at that 9 EMA as support, and then looking at Microsoft, inside candle on the previous day, 0.3% to the upsides, bouncing a little bit off of VWAP. VWAP has held the last couple tests now at 520.67. So if you want to trade bullish off of that level, probably a good place to do it. Your trailing stop would be only about $3 lower from current price. Momentum is a little bearish, RSI is a little bearish, but I don't think this is going to crater by any means. So looking to trade bullish probably off of that level. Moving over to Tesla and NVDA. Tesla came down and retested that trend line once again. Is this a zone that's going to hold? We did get a nice bounce off of this level after overthrowing it. Momentum's a little bearish, RSI still above the SMA, still could fall a little bit more and still hold that structure as bullish. Got some trend support in here around 326.30. This structure is a little tougher now, right? So you still have higher highs and higher lows off of this structure here. Little extended maybe. Like I said, want to see it get above 336. If we can get above that level, then you could look for a push to this trend here around 346, and then of course the next level 355. Otherwise, if we cannot get there, it's likely to fall to 326, like I said. So interesting there. And then NVIDIA basically unchanged again on the day, up just 40 cents, still holding support at that 180 level, but momentum is starting to fade here. This is starting to look like somebody is taking profits on NVIDIA. It's been a massive run, absolutely a time to take profits in my opinion. Moving over to staples and discretionary, staples fell on the news today. We had a little bit of a consolidation top. I was hoping we would get the continuation here. Didn't work out that way. We ended up falling about 1% to the support. 81.85 continues to be support. This has been really choppy sideways trading for about 1 year at this point. August of 24, we're in the same place we were a year ago. Are we going to find some support in here? Seems unlikely at this point. If this is the top of the range, bottom of the range is around 79.90, and then looking at discretionaries, inside candle, still holding above trend support, still holding the levels, of course, so this is still bullish. Can we get a push to that 235.85 area, or is this going to fall back below 227? That's really the trade, at least for now. Moving over to breadth, as you would suspect, breadth did turn down just a little bit. So gap down and doji here down 11% on 20-day breadth. Didn't quite make it to the level 68.14. I was really hoping we were going to get above that into this kind of 77 area, middle of this range. But now this could be a problem. Does it come into the zone and reject lower from here? And then looking at 50-day, gapped below the level 62.25. We were pretty excited yesterday that we could get above that and hold, looking for 68.66. And then potentially 77.50 or so in that area. But now we got a gap down, retest of the level. Does this sell a little bit more tomorrow? That's hard to say for now, but doesn't look nearly as good today as it did yesterday. Really wanted to see that continuation, and we just did not get it. Moving over to the dollar did like what we got today. Big push higher here on the dollar to that 200 SMA. On the hourly chart, nice move. On the daily chart, up about 0.5%. Is it going to continue to bounce from here and push to that next level? I do believe that it will. We held the structure like we were looking for. Momentum stepping to bullish. RSI stepping to bullish. Still a little bit below the SMA, but holding above the SMA here on the hourly. Would like to see this continue up tomorrow. Moving over to bonds, J&K pulled back, TLT pulled back, didn't love the move. Makes sense that these are falling, interest rates likely to stay a little bit higher. With the higher inflation potentially coming, that could slow the recovery on TLT, but apparently not true in the Fed futures, which is interesting. So Fed futures still predicting a bunch of cuts, TLT not pricing that in yet, which is part of the reason I don't really believe those Fed futures, at least as they sit right now. Moving over to the VIX, VIX spiked up just a little bit to this trend line area and then rejected from there a little bit. Momentum still a little bearish. RSI stepped up just a little bit, but still below the SMA. Could argue maybe higher low setup there. Interesting. Last time we got a little spike up off of a low, we did get a little bit of follow through here. I'm not really expecting anything crazy like that, but we're in a zone of support just above that level, 14.7. Moving over to my accounts, I was down a little bit on the day with that Russell position. I decided to roll out and down on it, and I didn't do it in the best way, which was a little annoying, but either way, as long as we can get above 229 tomorrow, that would put me in good shape. We're up just a smidgen after hours. Want to see that continue to go here to that 229 area. If we could, that would put me up about 400 on that position, which should get me on a profitable position between the 2 days. Either way, I could continue to roll out and down a little bit, but if we get below 226, that's going to be a problem in my opinion. So that's kind of the last ditch support area, 229. Want to see it get above that level and close. Let me know down in the comment section what you think of United Health. Is that a place to be now that Berkshire thinks it might be a place to be? Are you buying United Health? And what are you doing with that PPI data? Is that going to forecast future CPIs over the next couple months? Is that going to stall out the Fed at current levels? And if that happens, does Trump do something crazy? Hard to say at this point. Lots of factors. Let me know what you think in the comments. Otherwise, like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. Make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.